physiology of vestibular system. Let's start. So, to introduce, the vestibular system mainly has four functions, that is gaze or the gaze stabilization, eyes should be fixed, balanced localization, so when we are walking we should have a balanced movement, body orientation with respect to gravity, and readjustment of autonomic system. And the information reaches to the brain mainly by the visual, the vestibular, and the proprioceptive sensation. There are a few other important factors also, like the learning, memory, drugs, aging, environment, but mainly these are the three sensations by which this the sensation reaches the brain, and then the brain carries out the activity by vestibulo-ocular reflex, vestibulospinal and the vestibulo-colic reflex, the orientation, and autonomic functional adjustment. So we need to first understand that there are two kinds of motion. One is rotational motion and one is translational motion. The rotational motions is mainly sensed by the semicircular canal, and the translational motion are mainly sensed by the otolith organs, that is the utricle and the saccule. And the rotational movements are yaw, which is along the vertical axis, pitch along the side to side movement, and roll is rotation from front to back. This GIF and this image shows or makes us understand this concept. And the translational motions are very easy, that it can be a left right motion, it can be a up down motion, and it can be a front and back motion. The semicircular canals are arranged in such a way that the left anterior semicircular canal is parallelly functions with the right posterior, and the right anterior parallelly functions with the left posterior. So they are called as the LARP or the RALP plane, and two semicircular canals or the horizontal canals lie at 30-degree angle, but they are parallel to each other. When the head moves in one direction, if you see in this figure, when the head moves in left direction, it is basically the movement of the endolymph which happens because of the inertial movement, and the endolymph moves in the opposite direction. So if my head moves on the right direction, my endolymph will move in the left direction. And this leads to stimulation of the receptor, and this leads to detection of the movement. So we also have to understand what are the sensory organs, mainly the otolith and the semicircular canals. The otolith consists of the utricle and the saccule, which detect the linear or the translational movement, and the saccule and the utricle are orthogonically or perpendicularly located. The saccule is located in the vertical plane and utricle is located in the horizontal plane, and the receptor is called as the macula. The hair cells are present in the macula, and the tip of the hair cell is present in a gelatinous structure which contains calcium carbonate crystals, also CaCO3, which is called as otoconia or otolith. Similarly, understanding the semicircular canal, in the ampulla there is presence of the receptor. There are type 1 and type 2 hair cells which have got stereocilia and the kinocilium, and the stereocilia are attached to each other by tip links, which are mainly the ion channels, and the movement of the stereocilia towards kinocilium leads to stimulation or excitation of the sensation. In horizontal canal, the utriculopetal movement, that is the movement towards the utricle, is excitatory, and in vertical canal, the movement away from the utricle is excitatory. So horizontal canal, it is toward the utricle, which is excitatory. In vertical canal, away from the utricle is excitatory. Ewald's law is also based on the same thing. So when I move my head on the right side, so all of you can see my head. My head is moving on the right side. In this case, the endolymph will be moving on the opposite side. On the right side, the endolymph is moving toward the utricle. On the left side, the utricle is moving away from the endolymph is moving away from the utricle. So the first law is that the eye movement and the head movement always take place in the plane of canal stimulated. So depending on which canal is stimulated, eye movement will take place. That is the first law. Very simple. When we move the head, endolymph in the canal moves, and depending on which canal moves, eye movement will take place. First law. Second law is that in the horizontal semicircular canal, ampulopetal movement is excitatory. And third law is that in the vertical, that is the anterior and the posterior canal, it is the ampulofugal movement which is excitatory. In semicircular canal, as we understood that the endolymph movement is the main key trigger factor. Now we need to understand that the head acceleration and deceleration, it stimulates the sensory epithelium. And when the head goes in a continuous motion, the sensation reduces. Now when the movement happens on the cupula is the area on which the hair cells of the cristae, that is the cristae, are attached. Now when the movement of the endolymph takes place, the inertial movement of the endolymph happens. The cupula also gets forced and the viscous force acts. So three things are acting on the wall. One is the inertial force of the endolymph. Second is the cupula's elastic force and the viscous force on the fluid. So three movements are taking place. We need to also next understand about the vestibulo-ocular reflex, one of the most important part of the understanding the vestibular system, and this can also be a short note. The main reason or the function is to stabilize the visual environment when the head is moving. So when my head is moving, the eyes should be fixed. That will lead to good balance. So it is the push-pull action which takes place. That is, the vestibular system of the ear is constantly sending information to the brain at the rate of 90 spikes per second. Now, suppose my head is moving on the right direction. So endolymph of my head is moving on the right direction. Endolymph of the right ear is moving toward the utricle, that is the utriculopetal movement. So the excitation happens. So the basal spike, which was 90, now goes to 300. So excitatory stimulus happens when my head is moving on the right side. And similarly, when the head moves on right side, the endolymph of the left side is moving away from the utricle. So utriculofugal movement, which is inhibitory, so the activity decreases. So now vestibular nucleus interprets the difference between the spikes of the two semicircular canal, and from the nucleus, the sensation goes to the oculomotor and the abducent nucleus. Because let us understand, see my face, when my head is moving on the right side, my eyes will stay focused on a center object. This means my right eye medial rectus will be working and the left eye lateral rectus will be working. So when the head moves on the right side, the same side medial rectus works, opposite side lateral rectus works. Same side oculomotor nerve is working, opposite side abducent nerve is working. This is what is vestibulo-ocular reflex. This is the diagram which shows the same thing. So see the orange color, that is the head moving on the left side. So when the head moves on left side, same side, if you see the entire orange line, the sensation goes to the vestibular nucleus. And when my head moves on left side, same side medial rectus works, continue seeing the orange structure, and the opposite side lateral rectus work. When the blue color, when the head moves on the right side, same side medial rectus works and opposite side lateral rectus works. This is a simple line diagram which explains the vestibulo-ocular reflex. So it is this push-pull mechanism, and similarly it is the same push-pull mechanism which also acts on the anterior and the posterior semicircular canals, and this also governs the vertical canals. However, based on the Evalds law, in the vertical canals, the ampulopetal movement is inhibitory and the ampulofugal movement is excitatory. So what is this nystagmus? So what nystagmus happens? So vestibulo-ocular reflex. So again, see my face. When my head moves on the right side, my eyes tries to keep the focus on a center object. But if my head keeps moving and the eye cannot keep that focus, it shifts the focus and picks another fixation point. So when my head was moving on the right side, first there was a slow movement towards the opposite side. And when this movement cannot be kept, the eye jumps and the corrective movement takes place, which is the fast component on another point. So basically nystagmus is an involuntary, rapid, repetitive movement of the eye. So eye responds to head rotation is nystagmus. So in the slow phase, my eye keeps a slow phase till it reaches to a specific point or the maximum point of the canthus and then shifts a fast component, which is the corrective component. Or thus we have, as the sawtooth pattern shows, initially there is a slow phase and then there is a fast phase. Slow phase is the actual phase to keep the fixation point, and fast phase is a corrective phase when the fixation point cannot happen. The nystagmus is mainly given the side based on the fast component because the fast component is easy to identify. However, understand that slow component is the main part because of the vestibulo-ocular reflex, and when the fixation cannot happen, the eye corrects itself and the fast component happens. One more important point is velocity storage, which is sometimes difficult to understand, but let us see that what happens. But let us try to understand this, that when my head moves, the initial acceleration happens and the brain detects the movement. But if the velocity of the head movement remains constant, after 30 seconds, this nystagmus disappears because the head will only sense the start and the beginning of the movement. However, it has been noticed that because of with the involvement of brainstem and the cerebellar network, in spite of this movement, the head is able to have a compensatory nystagmus, or the head is able to get this sensation that it is still moving. And this is called as the velocity storage mechanism, which helps the brain to have an idea that the head is in constant slow rotatory movement. It is mainly with the VOR and the optokinetic reflex which helps in this. Coming to second reflex, which is the vestibulospinal reflex. So vestibulo-ocular reflex was for fixing the eye on a specific point. Vestibulospinal reflex is mainly to stabilize the body during the movement. This also acts like a push-pull mechanism, but here they are the flexors and the extensors which are working against each other. So when the head is falling, when the body is falling anteriorly, the extensor muscle pulls it behind, and when the head is falling posteriorly, the flexor muscles pulls it anteriorly. Basically, any reflex will have a efferent and the afferent. So the effector organ is mainly through the vestibulospinal tract. The muscles of the trunk and the arms and the limb gets affected. So from the vestibular nuclei, the sensation goes through the medial and the lateral vestibulospinal tract, and which leads to contraction. So first there is stimulus, there is stimulation of the vestibular nuclei. From that, the sensation goes to the vestibular nucleus, and from that, the lateral and the medial vestibulospinal tract will lead to movement of the body. Vestibulocholic reflex is same reflex, but it is only for the neck. That is stabilization of the neck during the movement. So vestibulo-ocular reflex for stabilization of the eyes, vestibulospinal is stabilization of the body, and vestibulocholic is stabilization of the neck. In this case, the head motion is stabilized by the vestibular receptors, and the compensatory movement or the contraction of the neck muscle happens by mainly the vestibulospinal tract with some involvement of the other tracts also. However, the neural pathway in human beings is not very clearly known, and the importance of this is also still under research. There is one more reflex, which is cervico-ocular reflex, which is ocular stabilization reflex that is elicited by rotation of the neck. So it works along with the vestibulo-ocular reflex and the optokinetic reflex, again, not much reliable in humans. So basically cervico-ocular is with the movement of the neck, the sensation goes and the eye movement and the eye stabilizes. We also need to understand the central projections of the vestibular system. That is, once the vestibular, from the utricle and the utricle saccule and the semicircular canals, the superior and the inferior vestibular nerve forms, which reaches the vestibular or the Scarpa's ganglion. From there, the sensation reaches the vestibular nucleus. There are 4 vestibular nucleus: the medial, lateral, superior, inferior. And from the vestibular nucleus, there are ascending components or the ascending fibers, and there are descending fibers. Let us not get confused. But only remember the descending fibers are the lateral and the medial vestibulospinal tract. The ascending fibers, they go to the cerebellum, they go to the obviously third nerve, the fourth nerve, and the sixth nerve, and they also go to the brain or the cerebral cortex. So ascending fibers, descending fibers from the vestibular nucleus. Same thing written here, the superior vestibular nerve and the inferior vestibular nerve. This knowledge is important because the inferior vestibular nerve carries sensation only from the posterior canal and part of saccule, and superior vestibular nerve carries sensation from the horizontal canal, anterior canal, utricle, and minimal part of the saccule. This is the same thing which we mentioned in the previous diagram, line diagram. You can describe it or just draw that diagram. After this, we have to write, whenever we understand the physiology of vestibular system, we also have to write a long question. It is very important that we write the applied aspects because we are clinicians. We need to write the applied aspects. So these 4 or 5 points are important when you're writing the applied aspect. First is acute unilateral deafferentation, which is also same like a suppurative labyrinthitis. That is active stimulation of the head active stimulation of the labyrinth take place. So suppose on the right side, there is hyperactivity of the right semicircular canal, hyperactivity take place. So right side semicircular canal is now hyperactive. So from 90 spikes, the spikes have become to 300, but left side, it is still 90 spikes. So the head, though is not moving, but brain perceives that the head is moving on the right side. Hyperactivity on the right side, brain perceives that the head is moving on the right side. The vestibulo-ocular reflex gets stimulated and the medial rectus of the same side and the lateral rectus of the opposite side moves. So the slow component is toward the left side and fast component to same side. Understanding that in case of acute labyrinthitis, suppurative labyrinthitis, vestibular neuritis, the nystagmus is towards the same side. The nystagmus is to the same side of the affected ear, same side of the affected ear. Same side, not the opposite side, same side of the affected ear. Similarly, understanding if there is a paralysis. So once there is paralysis or paralytic labyrinthitis or acute unilateral deafferentation, so suppose there is right side deafferentation, from 90, the spikes have become 0. And here it was a 90 itself. So the brain perceives that the head is moving on the left side. And so the vestibulo-ocular reflex will get stimulated. Nystagmus will be there with slow component on the opposite and slow component on the right side and fast on the left side. That is, nystagmus is to the side opposite to the paralytic side. So understanding, if the activity increases, nystagmus is to the same side. If there is paralysis, nystagmus is to the opposite side. We also remember this by cows, that cold is opposite, warm is same side. Cold is paralytic, that is opposite side, and warm is active, that is on the same side. Head impulse test or the head thrust test is important to understand the vestibulo-ocular reflex. We hold the head of the person, and if I move my head on right side and tell the patient to fix the gaze on the tip of the examiner, so when my head moves on one side, the eyes will remain fixed on the tip of the examiner. However, if one side vestibular symptom is not working, my eyes will move along with the head, and then there will be a contraction or a saccade, and then the eye will jump and move on the fixed slide. So when the subject head turned to lesion side, vestibulo-ocular reflex is deficient, so the eyes moves with the head as shown in this figure, and then patient makes an attempt and refixes. So a saccade is seen, which is a head impulse test positive. Also, knowledge of superior and the inferior vestibular nerve is important for clinical tests, especially caloric and the rotatory test, which mainly check the horizontal semicircular canal, and CVEMP is mainly to check the saccule, which checks the inferior vestibular nerve. Knowledge of Evalds law is essential to understand the nystagmus or different types of nystagmus in BPPV. Gaze holding is also important, mainly the vestibulo-ocular reflex and the optokinetic reflex help to maintain the gaze. We have not discussed optokinetic reflex. Just to understand this, that when the head is moving, the vestibulo-ocular reflex acts And when the surrounding is moving, like we are sitting in a train or seeing a moving object, the vestibulo, the optokinetic reflex, works and tries to keep the vision fixed as far as possible. So gaze holding mainly by these two mechanisms together. Thus, to conclude, vestibular system plays a very essential role in maintaining the balance along with the inputs from the eye and the proprioception. And understanding this is very, very essential to diagnose and manage the peripheral causes of vertigo. So there are various conditions, various things like vision, hearing, labyrinth, the receptors, somatosensory receptors, which send the information to brain. And from the brain, there is orientation, there is balance, there is stabilization, autonomic process happens. Labyrinth plays a very important role. I hope this small presentation will help you write a long question. It is a challenging topic to understand. I have tried to summarize the entire Scott Brown and make a short note kind of thing or a long question kind of thing. You can write these headings in your long question and I'm sure we'll get good marks. Any doubts, please put in the comment section. Thank you so much.